Most people have arrived now, so welcome everyone. My name is Phoebe Tucker and I'm a Senior Nature Associate at the Green Finance Institute. Today we're here to explore how off-site B&G can support local placemaking and community needs. Now, B&G is still a fairly nascent policy. We're just over a year in, but really, I think most people would agree the scale of this policy and its relationship with the planning system means that there's still quite a bit to figure out and bed down. However, it's often seen as one of the most ambitious nature policies in the world and the biggest step forward for England's nature recovery agenda in decades. So B&G is also a very multifaceted policy, and you might be talking about different things depending on which element you're focusing on and who your audience is. So there's definitely a lot of discussion around how developers are meeting their B&G requirements on site, or how farmers are engaging with B&G policy, or even how the B&G metric itself works. So there's a million things we could be focusing on. Today, however, we're talking about how B&G is supporting local placemaking and how it fits in with development plans, local plans, and the placemaking agenda more widely. To that end, we've been asked by DEFRA to organise this webinar for government colleagues that focuses on this question and dig into the learnings of the Natural Environment Investment Readiness Fund, or NEIRF for short. I'm just going to change slides and give just a couple of minutes about the NEIRF, because I know that some of you will not know about this fund. It's a government-backed development fund that's been running since 2021, and it's ran by DEFRA and the Environment Agency. Essentially, the purpose of the fund is to build and test business models that can channel private finance into nature. So we know that we need a lot of capital flowing into the natural environment, and the public budget simply can't support it in its entirety. So we need to build the relationship between the private sector and nature to figure out how we can transition to an economy that values and invests at nature at scale. So the Natural Environment Investment Readiness Fund is absolutely meeting such a crucial gap in that it has supported projects around England to build and test these business models. And they might be focused on carbon sequestration or biodiversity uplift, nutrient neutrality, flood risk reduction. I think it's been running, the total number of projects that it's supported is 127, and it's been running over 3 different rounds of funding, and it's been going since 2021. And the recipients include farmers, estate managers, environmental charities, local government, some private companies. And so really what you've got from this fund is a huge range of projects that focus on different environmental outcomes and different business models. And I can't tell you how much learning and insight is locked into these projects. And it's definitely in everyone's interest that we focus on what we can learn from all these different projects, how we can replicate models, how we can scale in order to better understand the potential for unlocking private finance into nature. So, you know, the purpose of today, as I said, is to explore the question of B&G and local placemaking. And the NEIRF has supported a number of projects that focus on B&G as part of their models. Now, we're really lucky today to be to hear from 3 different projects of the NEIRF. So we've got David Lowe, who works at Warwickshire County Council. He's a service manager of ecology, historic environment and landscape. We're also going to hear from Chris Avent, who is the Green Estate Manager of Plymouth City Council, and Matthew Morrison-Clarke, who is the Business Development Manager of Environmental Markets at BBOWT. So the plan for today, we're going to hear from each of these 3 individual projects. We're going to hear about their learnings from the NEIRF, but more importantly, what their thoughts are about how B&G can support local placemaking and community and development. And then we're going to open it up to the floor to hear from you, because we understand that you are all interested in this topic and will likely have many, many questions for our panelists. So with that, I will just return to the slides. If you just, apologies. And we're first going to hear from Chris Avent from Plymouth City Council. So over to you, Chris. How are you doing?
Thanks, Phoebe, and thanks everyone. Good to be here and to give you a little bit of an insight into work we've been doing in Plymouth, as Phoebe said, through NEIRF and through a range of other kind of funded areas of work. So yeah, just talking very quickly and briefly to start with, and this is be a very quick whiz through just to give you a sense and an insight into the work we've done in Plymouth to bring biodiversity net gain from a sort of from the Environment Act through into kind of local delivery and establishment of our Habitat Bank in Plymouth. Next slide, please, Phoebe. So just to say that this work has kind of, yes, as Phoebe's kind of mentioned, come through a round of NEIRF funding, so we're in round 2 of that. But before that, it's also the genesis, I suppose, of the concept and the thinking behind this was born out of a Future Parks Accelerator Programme, which was funded by, at the time, yeah, sort of MCHL DLUC in that period, Heritage Funded National Trust, to kind of build, working with a number of local authorities to think about, yeah, modernisation, transformation, kind of reimagining kind of how we build sustainable management of our green spaces across the country. Next slide, please. So just to kind of, yeah, starting point, there are a few key points I'm going to pick up on here. So policy position and kind of our starting point in Plymouth was really important. So the map on the screen there shows you what is currently kind of our nature recovery network as mapped currently, kind of work in progress. But that's built from a biodiversity network, which we'd mapped across the city and which was implemented and approved through our local plan in 2019. In 2019, that also, the signing off of that local plan also brought biodiversity net gain into a local policy position. So we've been working with biodiversity net gain since 2019, kind of within planning balance, so pre-Environment Act, but it gave us a really good opportunity to build, as I said, there on our strengths. So we had experience of working with biodiversity net gain when we started doing this work into sort of the 2021. Kind of when we started the thinking, we had a really strong policy position around where our sites were, where our kind of biodiversity network existed. We had really good mapping and data behind us to enable to build that. And we also understood, obviously, the context those sites sit within the city. So in terms of the other needs of communities in and around those areas and where we might want to target biodiversity net gain as a tool and a solution to improving green spaces. Next slide, please. So early work, we started kind of like big scale. We looked across the board. We're thinking about green finance more broadly, and the concept we came up with this was the concept of the Ocean City Fund, which has now merged into our arm's length vehicle, which we've set up, an arm's length company to the council called Ocean City Nature, being our key governance vehicle to hang all of our various green finance initiatives from. So the schematic there just shows you kind of a really simple kind of like concept around how that works, with kind of the investment kind of coming in at a sub fund level. And the first sub fund we've created is our Habitat Bank. We're also doing work in the background, a range of other kind of areas around carbon and water, etc., to kind of hopefully bring those forward in time. Next slide, please. So the vision of Ocean City Nature, the concept was around, yes, creating that resilient, accessible natural environment across the city. So playing back to that point that Phoebe's mentioned about local placemaking, very much kind of wedded in, kind of playing a part, being a vehicle to enable local placemaking across the triple bottom line. So, you know, in terms of a nature-rich city, delivering kind of, biodiversity outcomes for wildlife and people, that in turn supporting thriving and empowered communities, so ensuring that where we invest and where we drive this investment into the city to improve our green and blue spaces, we're kind of seeing that benefit for people, and also kind of making sure that that kind of works on a local economic kind of setting as well, to make sure that feeds back into that local economy, brings forward more jobs, more training, more skills development as well. So kind of really kind of broad range of thinking in terms of what the missions of Ocean City Nature are. Next slide, please. So first one, I said, the first kind of subsidiary of Ocean City Nature we've launched is our Habitat Bank. So we've set that up as a subsidiary to Ocean City Nature. This is the kind of in simplest sense, kind of how this works. We've raised £500,000 worth of investment for our 3 pilot sites we've invested in. That money has gone into Ocean City Biodiversity, which is the name of our Habitat Bank. That Habitat Bank has leased 3 sites from the council. We're in the process of leasing. We've got 1 leased and 2 are in process at the moment. To deliver that £500,000 worth of investment enables us to deliver 280 biodiversity units across those 3 sites, and obviously providing those biodiversity units back to the developer market. We're in the process of now just kind of realising kind of that the first kind of areas of work around that, and obviously the cash flows back into the vehicle, which enables us to repay our investment over a period of time, which we've taken as a commercial loan from the council itself, to make sort of and obviously pays for the operating costs of the business over the full 30-year plus period, which we've modelled us being able to kind of maintain those sites for. Next slide, please. So these are the 3 sites, just to give you a very kind of like a sort of bird's eye view. 2 of the sites, Hamwoods and Camwoods, are existing local nature reserves. So they have existing public access infrastructure in place. They have friends groups. So in terms of the business model we've created around this, it's enabled us to kind of capture some of those kind of the costs which kind of exist around the edge of that, not just about delivering BNG kind of in isolation, but about thinking about how that links into kind of use of the site, both for the purpose of kind of protecting the biodiversity net gain we're implementing, but also providing kind of high quality nature sites for people to visit and access nature. So yeah, that's been a really important aspect of that. And so these are the first 3 sites of what we hope to be kind of a pipeline. We've got about 50 or 60 sites mapped and baselined, which we hopefully hope to bring on forward in future years. Next slide, please. So just a couple of really important point here around principles. We set these out at the very beginning of our work. We did it in collaboration, not just with ourselves, but with people nationally, kind of Natural England playing to this, as well as others kind of working in a similar space. We wanted to ensure that we weren't solely driven by the finance around the opportunity around biodiversity net gain. We always needed to ensure that what we were delivering was delivering environmental, social and economic benefit for people in the city, and obviously within the concept of having a sustainable financial model, sustainable business model in place. So these were really important for us to refer back to as we were building the Habitat Bank to kind of check in on our work and making sure that we were kind of staying true to our mission. Next slide, please. And then just to say, yeah, in terms of kind of how we're doing this, so how is this being delivered? It's about delivering with the community, alongside the community. So the work, as I said, 2 of the sites we've got there are pre-existing nature reserves with friends groups, etc., attached to them. We're wrapping the delivery of biodiversity net gain to our wider programs of work. So it's a tool and it's a means to enable us to do that work, to bring forward. As you can see on the screen there, got a really great delivery team, which is kind of wrapped in delivering apprenticeships, delivering skills and training initiatives to young people, working with volunteer groups in terms of the delivery on site to deliver the biodiversity net gain. All comes together to ensure we get best value from the opportunity that BNG provides. And next slide, please. I think is the end. Okay, so that was very quick whiz through on that. On the link on the screen, there's a link to we did a really big deep dive into our Habitat Bank work in a webinar series we produced last year as part of the Feature Box program. So there's a link there to that, which I'll put in the chat in a minute so people have got it. It's the 2.5-hour webinars which go into a lot more detail around how we've got to this point so far. And there's contact details there if you want to reach out. Back to you, Phoebe. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Chris. I am just going to throw in a quick question, and I encourage everyone who has questions to post them in the chat or the Q&A function, whichever you prefer. But I'm curious to know, those 50 to 60 sites that you mentioned, are they all owned by Plymouth City Council, or are they kind of across different project developers?
Yeah, at the moment we've just focused on our own land holdings. So just looking at that, so there is also National Trust have also just recently got a Section 106 through for Habitat Bank in the city as well, but they're looking to wrap that in terms of their own kind of work on their own estate. So they're not looking to look into the offsite, into the wider market. So it's for their own purposes. So yes, everything we've done so far has just been focusing on the public estate, with which we don't, we have very limited amount of revenue to provide to those sites currently. So we're looking at it from that point of view.
Brilliant, thank you. That was really helpful. So now we're going to move to Matt Morrison-Clarke from BBOWT. And I'm hoping this screen share will queue up now. Very good. Matt, over to you.
Thank you, Phoebe. So I'm here to talk today about one of our sites that we've developed. We've developed 2 registered BNG habitat banks, but we were also working prior to that through the NEIRF funding project and also in the pre-compliance market as well. So next slide, please. So in terms of our phase 1, you'll recognize this chart from Chris's slides. We worked with Finance Earth, with the NEIRF funded project, and with 3 other wildlife trusts. I ignored sorry on that chart, I apologize for sorry. Developing this investment model, looking at long-term resilient income streams for the restoration of nature and delivering those ecosystem services. Ours involved development of a new habitat site adjacent to one of our largest nature reserves. Warwickshire were working on a former golf course that they were converting, and Cheshire was on an agricultural reversion project that they were doing. Next slide, please. The work that delivered in phase 1 that created this financial model that could be converted into an actual investment project, we used to basically expand our largest nature reserve, which is Chimney Meadows in the Upper Thames floodplain area. And we worked at the time with the support of the local authority, which was Vale of Whitehorse District. And they were working in partnership with another NGO, which was Trust for Oxfordshire's Environment, who acted as a broker on behalf of the local authority for doing pre-compliance BNG offsetting for development in the district. We supported this through the development of our habitat bank at Duxford Old River, and this generated a new and significant income stream for our charitable trust, which enabled us to expand that site and secure funding for the long-term development. And during the pre-compliance period, up until the end of 2023, we sold about £500,000 worth of biodiversity units into that sector. Next slide, please. At the start of 2024, in February, obviously the compliance market took effect, and we were the fifth, well, we were actually the third with our other BNG Habitat Bank, but for Duxford Old River, we were the fifth onto the National Register, and we were able to achieve this by agreeing a Section 106 agreement with Vale of Whitehorse District Council. There was limited supply at that point in time, there was latent demand, and so we quickly started to attract inquiries and work with developers. And in the sort of 14 months since the market took effect, we've taken about £1.6 million worth of incremental revenue has come into our charity that's been invested into our BNG Habitat banks. However, in addition to the requirements within the Section 106 agreement and the overall principles of BNG, we are looking to deliver additional benefits because we are a wildlife trust and a nature conservation charity. So we work with Oxford University using their environmental benefits from nature tool, and along with looking at carbon sequestration, hydrology, water and air quality, for example, we are also looking at the way we interact with local communities. All of our sites, including our BNG Habitat banks, are accessible to members of the public, and we want to promote that connectivity with our local communities, so it's there for both education and recreation for the local communities. Next slide, please. During the last sort of 14 months within the compliance market, we have learned literally day by day as this market has come through. One of the first things that's become very evident is that the demand for units from developers has been very much biased towards small fractions of units. There was a lot of aspiration in the early days for receiving these big requests for 100-unit offsets and securing large amounts of funding instantly. However, that's not been the case in our experience. And the little chart on the right indicates that the vast majority of our inquiries for less than a whole unit. However, we see that while it is a potential administrative burden, we see that as a definite positive opportunity because we can aggregate these small requests for units into the development and restoration of a larger strategic project, which will deliver overall benefits for nature recovery rather than trying to do small offsets on site, which are just not resilient. One other issue we've also come across is that whilst there may be 59 registered habitat banks on the Gain site register at the moment, there is a low diversity within those units available. There are basically 3 predominant units, 2 grassland, 1 mixed scrub, that dominate the market. The risk this presents, or the challenge it presents, is that for local authorities, often when units are required, they will have to refer offsetting to out of area, which is not great under the mitigation hierarchy for BNG. And secondly, there is also a lot of application of the trading rules. So where you're not able to offset like for like habitat types, you're effectively having to trade up. You're using the metric to fulfill the legislation, whereas that is not necessarily the most appropriate solution for biodiversity, but it's a simple fact that if the units aren't available, the metric has to be applied and you trade up to the next distinctiveness level of category. Next slide, please. However, we as a wildlife trust, along with the other 45 wildlife trusts across the UK, are actively supporting BNG. We see it as a great opportunity for helping to restore nature and support longer-term projects of nature conservation across England at this stage, hopefully progressing into Scotland and Wales in due course. So our future aim is to continue to develop high-quality habitat banks, not only on our own land, but also with partners, landowners, farmers, estate managers, and working on their sites as well to address what will be an increasing off-site demand for biodiversity net gain. At the same time, we are actively working with developers because on-site BNG is the predominant source of BNG at this point in time, and we wish to ensure that the right habitats are delivered in the right way, in the right locations, to make sure that they are resilient and they support the delivery of BNG on-site as well as it's being done by off-site providers. We also want to promote improved collaboration and transparency between all of the stakeholders within this market. Recently, due to challenges in terms of achieving Section 106 agreements with the local authority, the more recent surge of registered habitat banks have been secured through conservation covenants. There is a potential risk within that where a local authority is not involved in the development of a habitat bank within their district, that they cannot necessarily influence or help to align that to projects such as the LNRS. And we want to have more transparency across all stakeholders to make sure they're all working with similar aligned aims. And finally, ultimately, we in the Wildlife Trust want to encourage the delivery of what we refer to as high integrity BNG. It is the delivery of biodiversity, but with multiple additional environmental and social benefits, which may not be monetized, but they will deliver better outcomes for communities and for the climate crisis that we face. And finally, all of our sites that we develop will be managed in perpetuity. BNG may be only required on a site for 30 years, but we are looking longer term than that. And we do not want to see any successful work achieved during 30 years being reversed by future changes in habitat management or land management at that point in time. And again, contact details for our Wildlife Trust are at the bottom of this slide and will be shared. Thank you, Phoebe.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Matt. That was brilliant. So I should have said we will definitely share the slides around after this call, but I was particularly interested to hear that you are also working with developers on site. So I just wanted to ask a quick question. How do you find that relationship with them figuring out themselves what looks good on site alongside your offer of a habitat bank for their off-site needs?
I mean, obviously, the sector of developers is a very broad sector, so it does vary greatly. So, for instance, we've got a local business park that is developing the site, and their focus on the work on site is to support the residents in their business park to give them recreational, educational facilities there, as well as delivering biodiversity net gain. Conversely, on a pure housing development, they are also looking at the landscape design, the aesthetics of the site, the use of the site as outdoor green space. And so when we support developers, everything from a multiple commercial outlet down to a single property development, we will listen to what the needs of both the developer are and their capability, plus also the requirements and expectations of their client, and hopefully come up with a solution which meets the needs of all of them as best as possible, allowing for the financial implications as well. But the important thing is where they are trying to deliver BNG on site, we do wish it to be sustainable and resilient and achievable, as well as being engaging with the communities that are living on that site to make sure that they benefit and understand why the local landscape is being managed in a certain way.
Brilliant. That's really, really helpful. Thank you, Matt. Well, wonderful. So now we'll move on to our final speaker, David Lowe of Warwickshire County Council. And I will just double check we are sharing. Yes, we are. Very good. Over to you, David. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine, thanks. Sorry for a bit of background noise there, I think, in the back.
All good.
Thank you for inviting me to this bit of late notice. I've got some slides some of you may have seen before, looking at participants lists, etc. But there's a lot of them, so shall I just crack on and see if I can keep it to 5 to 7 minutes? My usual way of doing too many slides. So am I saying next slide? Yes, next slide. Next is my favorite word, I think it's going to be, because there's a lot of slides. So this is what I'm going to try and cover today. Briefly, and there's a little map I always put in there to show you where Warwickshire is, because we're often overlooked and forgotten unless you're on a motorway going through us really fast-ish. Move next slide, please. So I'm very fortunate. I have a big team, largest probably in the country, etc., where there's me looking after planning aspects in the BNG, but I also have a natural capital team on the right-hand side, purely set up after the NEIRF project, which I'll come on to in a while, to look at habitat banks and ecosystem service markets, i.e. nature markets, etc. But that's just to give you an idea of the empire that I look after. Next slide, please. Also, to give a bit of background history, we were a DEFRA pilot 2012 to 2014 for biodiversity offsetting. So I'm covering a little bit of that ground as we move on to local nature recovery into the future, and how that smooth transition is allegedly happening. So next slide, please. Again, you read this all at leisure with your G&T or your fruit slush or whatever your preferred drink is. So in a way, this is to give us an idea. I've just downloaded this morning, updated it on when we had a local credit, a tariff system in Warwickshire, as we did in when it was biodiversity offsetting. Going on to Matt's comments about those smaller units, people have had it hard to offset those ones. We enabled it through a local tariff type system. That, of course, is finished now because we've got the national tariff. But there's a little figure in there you may just see, nearly £10 million is what we've accrued since 2015 when we started collecting this money. And you can see we were successfully committing a lot of those developments over time, and a few still to be allocated. A list goes on, by the way, and the further down you go, still to be allocated sides is in there. But there's about £10 million worth of offsetting happened in those last few years. Next slide, please. What have we done with this money? Well, you can't quite see the maps on this slide, but the maps below show 2012-14 where our grasslands were in Warwickshire. This is 20 hectares or more of grassland, well, 5 hectares or more of grassland in 1 kilometre square. And you can just about pick out as you go along the purple blobs, which show where offsetting sites have come forward. And you can see that the fragmented nature of our grasslands are becoming less fragmented as BNG kicks in. So it works. We've shown it works. It's brilliant. But what it does show, because we also got a phase 1 survey for the whole of the county, is that we're actually increasing high levels, higher distinctness habitats. We're doing too much restoration of sites and not enough creation in the first few years. So we're now able to shift our focus, hopefully, onto creation of habitat to make that more and bigger instead of just better connected or better or joined up. And the Lawton principles. Next slide, please. So this is our NEIRF project. We were the NEIRF 1, and we were the first NEIRF project to ever complete. Yay! Did we get a bonus? No, we didn't. Did we get a pat on the back? Probably not. We just did. Our project was basically to look at the carbon market and planting of the 556,000 trees for climate change I had to do, because grassland was being recovered, as you saw on the previous slides, for biodiversity net gain. Woodland is now not being lost as part of planning applications. So you arguably BNG worked, offsetting worked, because it stopped the high distinctness habitats being hammered by planning developments. But it did mean that we weren't creating any woodland anywhere. So we thought, okay, Warwick District Council, next slide please, is setting up a net zero carbon policy. Would that generate carbon offsets in a mandatory market enough to plant 556,000 trees? That's what our NEIRF one of the aspects of our NEIRF project was looking at. And basically, the answer was yes, it did. Next slide, please. So we established a carbon market the following year, where the option would be that you could plant a tree. You could either buy carbon from a Warwickshire carbon market, or you could pay Warwick District Council some money into their local tariff type system. So it operated exactly the same way as BNG was coming forward at that time. We haven't yet planted any woodland, and the Woodland Carbon Code and some specific requirements that is still to be happened. That market still needs to be incentivized and it needs to be enacted, but the actual market parameters are out there, etc. So it could be a solution if there was anyone planting trees and wanted to join the party. But this money was at the Treasury Green Book levels of carbon, not at the 10, 15, 20 pounds per tonne. This was getting up to about £200 a tonne. It will manage a woodland, as Matt says, for perpetuity for at least 100 years, etc. Woodland will be seen as a crop for a landowner, not just a good thing to have and a bit of some money coming in from the side for it. And that's a philosophy we look to take forward. Next slide, please. We also looked at, from a NEIRF project, is other mandatory markets. So we were already focused on mandatory markets, what we could put in local plan policies to make it happen. And the low-hanging fruit could be air quality, nutrient neutrality. Ooh, is it in? Is it out? Is it in? Is it out? I'll leave that on to you all, on the participants to decide. But it was there, and we could do it. And flood risk mitigation, trading standards, social prescriber, all looked at. We've also looked at water quality now, because the Nature for Water project is coming to fruition here in Warwickshire. International consortium helping us bring forward a water quality market as well. Next slide, please. Because this is what we aim to do. This is the ultimate strategy. You could just look at it and read it. It's an ecosystem service, markets, mandatory markets. We have BNG up and running. We have water quality, as I said, carbon markets up and running, flood alleviation on its way through the Nature for Water and other sort of circumstances, other markets we're bringing online as best we can within policy formation, which could take 5-7 years to come to fruition. But if you don't start now, it's never going to happen. Next slide, please. How are we managing all this? We're doing it through a natural capital investment strategy, and that was the output of the suggested recommendation from a NEIRF project. We have now set it up. It's been adopted by all but Coventry within our sub-region area about a year ago in July. And the strategic aim is, what do we do and how do we spend that £10 million you saw earlier? And also, we are a responsible body. We'll be setting up conservation covenants with private and our own and partner sites, local authority sites, and to has a workaround to still put money into that local pot of £10 million. And we've got a finance working group just set up to see how much money interest we can get off that to pump back into, invest actually back into the natural environment and other nature markets, etc. Next slide, please. The governance of that is that every site that we bring forward, approve as part of a habitat bank through our responsible body status, conservation covenant status, or section 106 agreements, will go and be passed by cabinet members so that we keep priority. So Nuneaton better know that if it goes to Stratford, they'll get it back later, etc. So we're working all in partnership to deliver this. Social accountability is the phrase which I'm sitting on the steering group. They have a Natural England project at the moment, and it's key, in my opinion, that we keep local people involved in decision making, keep it as local as possible. So hence the portfolio holders sit and steer us as we go and how we spend and how we invest that money. Next slide, please. And that is what it's going to look to deliver. The natural capital pot of money we've got will look to deliver local nature recovery strategy, other natural capital strategies such as Solihull in Coventry when they're producing theirs, because they sit at West Midlands Combined Authority, but they're still in our planning area. Local authority, council action plans, climate change strategies, GI strategies, etc. So that's what that whole investment pot's looking to fund. It is a local authority one, so we haven't got an arm's length company as of yet. We're learning to walk first before we start to fly. Next slide, please. Natural capital investment strategy is also looking at proposed BNG. So our query is, and the local planners keep asking us, well, it's a national market, is BNG. Now we haven't got a local tariff, we've got less control. How will local policy spatial hierarchies weigh against national market philosophies? We're putting this type of flowchart into all our core strategies to see how that floats or not at public inquiries, examination of publics, trying to keep that place-making principles at the heart of decision-making, keeping local offsets local. And that's even down to the borough level, if not Warwickshire level, if not sub-regional level, and then elsewhere in England. we're very keen to keep that. We're going to test it out. Next slide, please. So I think this is the last slide. So we've done a lot of work in Warwickshire. We have a natural capital investment strategy now. It is up and running. We have full participants from our districts and boroughs and Solihull and Coventry. And we are literally now looking forward to take 8 public open spaces in each area, get a habitat bank set up in each of those areas, so that we can take local offsets, as Matt says. Those smaller, less than 1 unit type ones are quite painful to be delivering through the planning system at the moment. So we're looking to help deliver those elements in a cost-effective way by amalgamating them together. Most of the local wildlife habitat banks we have used in the past aren't interested in that sort of level of unit. And we imagine that's probably going the same with the 13 we've got on our books to try and bring forward as private offset sites as well. So we've got more people wanting to do good than there are developers doing bad, but it's a level of badness which is we've got to try and cater for. And a little bit in the bottom, local investment with local stakeholder engagement, with local decision making equals local placemaking, and that's what we're keen to put at the heart of this. I think that will do. We're trying to weave that into local nature recovery strategy, but I've run out of time. I'll leave it as that.
No, David, that was brilliant. Thank you so much. I really love that you mentioned local nature recovery strategies, and I think Chris and Matt mentioned those as well. So I think just an opening question that someone noted on the registration form was how are you finding the work that you've done on B&G? It's been happening for years, clearly, but alongside that, the local nature recovery strategy work has been developing. So how, from your perspectives, has that been coordinated? Where have there been frictions, and how overall has it been managed?
I chair the local nature partnership, which with Warwickshire County Council is also me writing it in that sense. So we've had a synergy with the LNP from day one, because we wrote our GI strategy in 2013 when B&G was offsetting, so it was forming. So even from that early days, we had engaged with the local nature partnership. They had endorsed the green infrastructure strategy. It was also their strategy. And that and they all had a chance to lead into it. So we've always had that public engagement in there, or sector engagement.
David, I'm sorry, I think it might be me, but I think there's some static noise coming from your headphones.
Is there? I can't
hear
hear.
Oh, it's gone now.
It's gone now. Okay.
Magic.
Perhaps it's me keep hitting it because I'm too vociferous in my arm movements. I'll sit back and relax a little bit.
Yeah, all good.
Basically, yes. So as I said, I'm chair of the LNP. We've had that engagement. The LMS has enabled us to actually go to a public and say, these are our biodiversity net gain maps. They work. Shall we keep it as it is? And they all came back and said, yes. We just need to integrate those maps I showed you with connectivity mapping. So we get that joined up, better sorted. But we've got that data. So in the end, I think the LNOS has been a good vehicle to refresh our GI strategy with greater placemaking people having an input into what's best they feel for them in a back garden, really.
Brilliant. Matt, Chris, would either of you like to weigh in? Because I understand it can be a very different process depending on which LNRS and what part of the country you're in.
Yeah, I'm happy to come in from a Plymouth/Devon perspective. So for us, Devon County Council is the responsible authority for LNRS production. And I was at our Devon LNP conference yesterday, actually, with the theme was the LNRS and the session on planning, BNG and LNRS kind of coming together. So I think there was a really interesting conversation there around how we haven't consulted on the Devon LNRS yet, so I think we're still kind of in play in terms of kind of how we make sure we play BNG into that in a kind of effective, meaningful way. But certainly, I think it's conversation yesterday was thinking about not only just around the LNRS, which is clearly going to be a really important tool, but how does that also relate to local plan making? So in terms of the context that we're all in terms of potentially, well, not all in, but many of us are in local government reorganisation terms as well, local plan kind of making. Yeah, how does this link together? For us, we've looked to mirror Plymouth, which is a sort of supporting authority scale that the LNRS methodology in terms of creating our nature recovery network, so that we've got a natural synergy between the county scale and then our own scale. And then within that, yes, we'll be looking to target, as sort of David's described, and evolve kind of towards a broader natural capital investment strategy, which will enable BNG being part of that, to enable investment to be directed towards the enhancement of that network.
Brilliant, thank you. Matt, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, just very briefly, insofar as we work across 3 different counties and quite a few different authorities within that. And so we've got LNRS coming through at all different phases at the moment. The thing I mentioned that we're trying to get is transparency across everybody involved in that process, because the concern is that with BNG being a commercial market, there is an opportunity for larger commercial players to come in and to be taking away some opportunities for nature restoration projects purely for their commercial benefit, rather than for aligning to the aims of the local authorities. So we're trying to engage with those organisations in a positive way to try and draw that together, so we don't lose the opportunity. BNG can be a seriously positive driver on the LNRS, and we're very keen to not miss that opportunity, which is why we're trying to bring that transparency and that support across those different stakeholders together at this stage.
Brilliant. No, I think transparency might circle back to that as another question, because I think that's a topic on a lot of people's minds right now. How do we improve that? But we will go to the Q&A, and I encourage everyone to submit their questions either through the Q&A function or the chat, because so much knowledge and expertise here. It's brilliant to see. So a question from Rob is that the biodiversity gains for the sites receiving funding is obvious, but what about the overall system gain that BNG should drive? How many of the units are supplied at the minimum 10% gain, or are you specifying higher levels of gain above 10% before accepting funding? So I think that might be to David and Chris, but Matt, if you want to come in with kind of the different levels of 10%, 15%, 20% that you've seen, that would be great.
Yeah, I'm happy to come in first of all from a Plymouth perspective, and I think this is very much kind of around particularly sort of the viability market, and I don't mean that necessarily solely in the sense of the developer market, but also in terms of kind of local context, and it comes back to that local placemaking point really. So I think down here, the work we've been doing with with colleagues sort of across planning as we've evolved and brought forward our habitat bank, that 10% net gain, that was always in our policy from 2019. It's obviously kind of come in as the compliant element through the Environment Act. There is very little headroom to move anywhere beyond that at this stage, at this point in time, in terms of the wider market. And there's a lot of pushback in terms of getting that balancing out right, in terms of making sure that we've got sustainable development moving forward in the city, growth of the city, but also ensuring that we've got some genuine biodiversity net gain arising from that. So at the moment for us, 10% is where we're working to. We're not going beyond that. In sort of period of time in the future, we'll look at that again, but at this stage that's when felt to be kind of a reasonable threshold.
Yes, I mean it watches the same thing really. The vast majority of sites come through a lot of those smaller losses, so therefore just looking to get 10% and squeezing that 10% as best they can in. We are pragmatic on this. If someone's building on arable land, 10% is fine. We want it in the right place for biodiversity, so they're going to do as much as they can on site, etc. But if they wanted to do a bit more planting houses, but offset a bit more elsewhere, we'll look at that. But those haven't come through quite yet, the system. So we are primarily dealing with those which are just trying to get over the wire, get over that 10%. As time goes by, ask us again another 2, 3, 4 years. That's what we found when we started this in 2012-13. The larger sites come on later in the system, 1 or 2 years into it. So you get this flush of smaller sites, we think, first anyway.
Absolutely.
Phoebe, from our perspective, the initial approach normally from a typical developer is to fulfill the minimum requirement, which is the 10%. However, we see some positive signs out there whereby if you engage with those developers and you try to talk about what they're trying to achieve, the actual additional cost for delivering BNG above 10%, so for instance, talking 20%, is not twice the cost. And there are potential benefits for doing that. So we are having a small amount of success with taking developers beyond the 10%. It's not unfortunately been legislated for, but developers out there are prepared if they see the value that it adds to their brand and their development and their organization. They are prepared to consider going at higher levels. And for us, we have to aim for higher than that, because our concern is BNG will not be successfully delivered, unfortunately, over 30 years. And therefore, if only 10% is achieved, it may end up being no net gain overall. So our view is we need to go beyond 10% to achieve a sufficient buffer so that if after 20, 30 years we look back at this, we will have delivered an actual net gain through these developments.
Brilliant. No, that's wonderful. I think understanding kind of both the biodiversity outcomes as the years pass and also as the system beds down, learning about the true cost of viability and challenging those assumptions that double the percentage means double the cost. I think you're right there. Brilliant. Well, I see we've got a raised hand. So Robert, I'm going to allow you to talk. I'm hoping that will work, but would you like to ask your question?
Yes, thanks. Matthew, it's on the back of just what you've said. I think I saw somewhere last year that DEFRA had said exactly what you've said, that increasing BNG from 10% to 20% would actually only lead to a 1% increase in costs for developers. I don't know if you've got any comment on that. And also, I've also seen something that said if we only go for 10% BNG, rather than actually increasing the biodiversity, we're actually only towing the line. Again, if you've got any comment on that, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Robert. Well, on your second point, then yes, unfortunately, I do kind of agree that if we only aim for the 10%, then we may actually not achieve any measurable, genuine uplift over the time. Going back to the former point, the metric's quite a complicated tool. So the actual cost equation between whether 20% is just an additional 1% of cost to the developer, from our calculations, I don't see a direct correlation on that level. So it's very difficult for me to quote anything on that. What happens is whenever a developer approaches us, we look at what they're requiring and we give them a number of options about potentially trading up into more distinctive habitats or going beyond the 10%. And we try to understand their commercial envelope as well. So therefore, we do try to push it as best we can, and we will demonstrate. And I think probably it's more than 1% to go from 10 to 20%, but it's not, certainly isn't double as Phoebe said. So therefore, it is reasonable to ask. And where we've asked, yes, a lot of people said no, but we've also managed to get quite a few to say yes as well. And I think as more and more that becomes the standard narrative, I believe there'll be more support for this process.
Brilliant. Thanks, Matt. Rob, I hope that's answered your question.
Yes, thank you.
Can I actually come in to say, I've always debated that 10%, and that's the angle we're heading for in Warwickshire, as you just saw, was actually having more nature markets, more mandatory, etc. So, because as I say, that disparity between just grasslands being created in Warwickshire, not woodlands or rivers, we're not going to have a water quality. It's not going to meet all our LMS or all our EIPs, local EIP targets. We're going to go down to devolution. So therefore, the more markets we have to tackle those gaps, the better, which when you all add them together, that 10% could be more than 10% or should be more than 10%. So in my view, in Warwickshire, there's different ways of dealing with the catch-up we've got to do.
Very interesting. Thank you, David. Yeah, no, definitely a really interesting line of inquiry. And I think to draw it back to that argument about transparency, we definitely need to collect more data live and feed this into both financial and ecological outcomes of the policy in order to move forward. So related to that, actually, we've got our next question from Ross, who asks that speakers have mentioned the risk that BNG, as one of the few sources of funding and action, distorts the overarching approach required for successful biodiversity recovery. How serious a risk do they think this is, and what mitigating action should be taken at a local and national level? Don't rush all at once.
It is exactly. Good question. It's that we've got a big hill to climb, haven't we, to nature's recovery, most depleted country. So I think it takes a lot of joined up government to put it back again and be a good political answer, not really answer it at all, in the sense that we've got to work out how we string all these markets together, incentive markets as well together, public goods for public services. Biodiversity Net Gain is one cog, and to be quite frank, it's a smaller cog than I think people imagined. Hence the questions about 10%, 20%, and other markets. In my answer to this, it's a collective policy, collective framework we need to go forward, and I think that's been gathered from these NEIRF projects. Lots of markets have been proposed, explored, proliferation of them, and then we've said, oh, I think we need a standard for the standards almost, and that's now happened. So I think there's been some fantastic work, world leading work we just need to build on to create those markets to get that recovery, if that's a sort of way of answering that. A policy, top down, bottom up approach should work.
I think my response to that, it is a difficult question that's asked. That's why I was a bit silent when it first came through. The risk is if we just stick to the letter with BNG, it could distort the market because we're actually using a proxy for biodiversity. And if all we're doing is trying to hit the 10% and the trading rules, then unfortunately that is not going to be the solution that we need. We need to look at biodiversity more holistically. We need to ensure that we're looking at species, we're looking at all different levels, and any opportunity to try and simplify this. And I'm also slightly touching on this potential, this strategic recovery fund or what have you. If we try to simplify how we measure and deliver biodiversity, the risk is that we will miss the bigger picture. We'll just be ticking the boxes, and meanwhile, the nature and climate crisis will continue. So there is a lot more work to be done, I have to say. And BNG is just one of those stepping stones. We have to learn from this and evolve and develop this better over time, but keep in place those other controls and risk factors on other aspects for species, for example, and make sure that they are adhered to in planning.
Brilliant. No, thank you, Matt.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I'll give my tuppence worth for what it is worth on that one. But I think just a sort of different perspective. I think in terms of the concept of the nature markets, I think we're probably all kind of familiar with I think the potential that we've been looking at and working towards in terms of that kind of £500 million sort of targets which government have set in terms of bringing new finance into this space. I think the work that we've been doing kind of is kind of pointing out, I think, the real challenge within that, and I think BNG actually is kind of is the most advanced of one of these markets kind of coming forward in terms of what we're trying to do and scale up in the Plymouth area. That really is tricky in terms of the amount of work required to kind of bring that forward, working on particularly on the demand side, so working with businesses and kind of to understand and unpick where they can genuinely put their, where they need to put their money towards objectives around nature recovery. Kind of there's little kind of compliance requirements around that, but there is a kind of, I think, a sense that there's almost a voluntary market around that, but we need to match that up with the right pipeline on the supply side, which I think is at the minute not kind of connecting. It's not kind of really quite going there. So I think that's the bigger risk, is that we don't kind of focus on that to kind of bring that to life.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chris. I think people have come to this reckoning that BNG is definitely not the silver bullet, and it's all about how it operates in tandem with other policies and mechanisms. So on that, actually, I'm so glad someone's asked this question. Stuart has asked, how do you see the proposed Nature Restoration Fund working with these approaches? And to those that don't know about the Nature Restoration Fund, it's a fairly new proposal from government, and recent working papers and the bill's been drafted that proposes it. This is a very live discussion, so I'm really happy we're talking about it here. Would anyone like to jump in?
I'm happy to start if you want. only because it was clear. Marion Spain, Chief Executive Natural England, was at the Devon LNP conference yesterday. She gave the keynote speech, and this was the thing she said she was most excited about the next 6 months in answer to a question that she was asked. So I think, yeah, in terms of how that relates to this, I mean, the concept is relatively similar, I think, in terms of the approaches maybe each of us have taken here in presenting, to thinking strategically, thinking kind of at a relevant geographic scale to then use BNG as a tool and a mechanism to drive interventions at landscape scale. The Nature Restoration Fund's kind of the same principle, isn't it, in terms of what that will look to do. I think my concern around it is how it's going to roll out and how it's going to, and over what time period. I know there's £14 million, I think, in the Natural England budget to kind of roll it out in the next financial year. Beyond that, it's in theory going to be self-sustaining. I think based on experience we've had in terms of work in Plymouth, multiplying that across the whole country, I think that there needs to be possibly a dose of pragmatism around how realistic it is to bring that to life in that time period. But yeah, maybe that's something to consider as we go into next year.
Interesting. Thank you, Chris. Yeah, I realise it is a very live discussion and there's a lot of uncertainty around how it will function and what it will look like. But what we've been told so far is that the NEIRF will not be subsuming BNG, and so they'll work alongside each other. Yeah, nodding heads. I'm glad that's accurate. But yeah, I'm just conscious of time. David and Matt, would you like to come on that question or any other remarks just before we close up?
The only point I'd want to make about the NEIRF is that if it's a strong vehicle for releasing restrictions on development, but the monies are used in the most appropriate way and the outcomes are delivered in a measurable way, then we would have no reservations about it. We don't want it to take away from BNG. BNG is a nascent market. There's lots of opportunity. It can work alongside. But the key thing is any monies that are generated through the NEIRF must be invested appropriately to deliver the right outcomes to align with LNRS and BNG and other nature recovery strategies.
Yeah, I would agree. I was very nervous about all the money was given out to help set up habitat banks, which could therefore take a lot of the extra funding, which would have set up a habitat bank. So those who didn't get it may have had more expensive habitat bank units than the lower ones. It distorts the market. And therefore, we've got to be careful what the governing principles of that fund is, so it doesn't, again, distort any future market as it comes forward. It can be seen, actually, this kind of helping hand is actually doesn't help at all. It actually slows the market down because people more confusion in it. If people understand the business model, they know business model. It's risk, it's gain. There's supply and demand sorted. This can sometimes go, oh, I better watch these pilots, haven't we? See what happens. And that's what we found out in Warwickshire. We just had one really a leader startup and was the first habitat bank in the country. They took the risk and they've milked it, dare I say. But that's what it's for. That's capitalism in working in some respects. As long as it's high integrity, Matt. As long as it's high integrity, that's what we've got to push.
Good point.
Brilliant. Well, that's an excellent note to finish on. Thank you, David, and thank you, Chris and Matt, for joining. And I hope everyone has taken insight and learning away from this, because it is something we could talk about for hours more. We've touched on a number of different topics in this webinar, and I just want to thank all our panelists again, and also to DEFRA for circulating this event amongst government colleagues. So we will be circulating the slides and the recording of this webinar to everyone on the registration list and beyond. So if you have any questions, we do encourage that you get in touch. And we also know that there's another webinar on Monday that's focused more on the rural aspect of BNG, which I'll post in the chat. But just want to thank everyone again for joining, and I hope everyone has a wonderful day.
Thank you.